Medical Mariner, Inc.
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from our Norfolk studio, home of the Atlantic Fleet, Medical Mariner, Inc.
Hello and welcome to Medical Mariner, Inc. I'm your host, Paul Stewart. This podcast is going to cover my journey in life, some things I have learned. We will talk about medicine, about PA school, about changing careers, about tattoos, and scuba diving, technical diving. Might even talk about skydiving in there, growing things, resilient living, training, anything else that comes to mind. I will attempt to get some folks on here now and then to talk about things with us, and we'll see where this journey goes. Thanks for listening, and now here's today's episode. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Mariner, Inc. called Turning Point. This episode is going to be about the year 2014, which was a very strange, very difficult, but a very transformative year for me. 2014 is the year I did live in Uganda for quite a bit of time, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some other things that happened in that year. I was in a relationship with a woman that I'd been seeing for a few years, and some things that happened that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for, mostly because part of it's her story, and I know she's a private person, and it's her story to tell if she wants to. However, some of the things that went on actually made me seriously doubt my personal decision-making capacity. Something we've not brought up in this podcast before. I have been married twice before my current wife, Nancy, so had some practice at not being able to do that well. So when all these things started happening, it really made me kind of doubt what my thought processes were and where I was with things. So I actually set up what I called my personal advisory committee. Honestly, I think it's a pretty good thing if you want to try to consider setting one up on your own. You don't have to be at a state of self-doubt and things. It can actually just be good to have a group of people you trust that are people you think can provide you advice and input from a lot of different angles. The people on my personal advisor committee were Rusty Coram, who is still the senior pastor at New Hope Church, where I was attending at that time. That is also where I met my wife, Nancy. Stephen Bulldog Frazier, who he's just a guy I knew through a small group at church, very deep in the Word, very big prayer warrior, so I thought he was a great guy to have on there. Chad Mansky, he's a retired brigadier general from the Air Force. He and I also did a lot of physical training together, running. We did some Tough Mudders and things. And then the last person I had on the committee was my dad. We'd meet, I would talk over things I was thinking, things that were going on, and get their input on what they thought I should be doing and if they thought I was on track and keeping things going. Before 2014, I had gotten EMT certified, and I was considering getting my medic certification. As we've discussed in previous episodes, this was driven by my desire to be more useful on medical missions in Uganda. I actually took a couple of classes at Northern Virginia Community College towards this, and my general plan was to go ahead and proceed with that. An interesting thing that happened in 2014, there were some changes in staffing at the church I was going to, and I was asked to go on a mission trip to Guatemala with the youth group there by one of the associate pastors. My wife, Nancy, was one of the people who was going on that trip as well, and she and a few of the other people going had been on Guatemala before, so she wasn't super happy from what I have heard about my being asked to go on. It kind of was a little bit of a slight to them, maybe, as some of the folks felt. However, we went there, and I was actually taking a chemistry course at the time, I believe, where I was doing some online correspondence things and was working on that while we were in Guatemala. I did hear a rumor that while we were there, our daughter Taryn mentioned to Nancy, "Hey Mom, why don't you and Mr. Paul start dating?" I don't think Taryn knew I was seeing someone else at the time. And Nancy is reported to have responded to that with gross. How things change. A couple of interesting things happened while we were in Guatemala. The village was Pacaya. It's in the shadows of the volcano Pacaya there. This girl had signs and symptoms of appendicitis. With one of the local missionaries, we got her packed up and took her up to the hospital in Guatemala City one evening. That was several hours away from Pacaya. At the examination there, they determined that they did not believe she had appendicitis, so we took her back to the village, and eventually we prayed over her, and not sure if she had appendicitis and that healed her. Not sure if they were writing their diagnosis at the hospital, but from what I hear, she got better. We left the country actually shortly thereafter. Another thing that happened on there that was kind of interesting was there was this young girl, Maddie, and this is the day after actually that trip back and forth to Guatemala City, so I had almost no sleep. Anyway, I'm sleeping in one of the trucks as we had children out in the village distributing food, and Maddie's banging on the door. And I got up kind of grumpy, and she said, "Paul, I want you to come see this guy real quick." So she drags me off. We go wandering over to this hut, and we walk in. It's a dark hut, and then I hear over in the corner, and I was thinking, oh my God, Maddie, you just gave us all tuberculosis. I came back, got tested for TB, and it turns out, no, we did not get tuberculosis, although that fellow may possibly have had some. We did work on getting him referred to the right people for treatment as well. I have had all the tests since then. I have to get tested regularly as a healthcare provider, and I have not been exposed to tuberculosis to date. After I got back from Guatemala, I had decided while I was over there that it made sense. I was at a point in my life where I could probably go over and spend some time in Uganda and work in the clinics there. I met with my advisory board, talked to all of them, and they seemed to think it was a good idea. So I decided to ask for a leave of absence from the company I was contracting to a government agency for, where I was working as their, this is a fancy title, cloud architect. My daughter Kaden likes to joke that during that time I was spending my time right next to the Rainbow Engineers. I did ask for that leave of absence, and the customer came back and said there was no way they were going to grant that. This seemed a little bit weird to me because the story was that it had taken them over a year to fill the position of cloud architect, and it took them a while to find. I don't think I'm that special, but apparently somebody thought I was. I'm not sure what the motivation was. Maybe they thought that I would say, if I can't take the leave of absence, then I won't do it. But I submitted my resignation and said, okay, if I can't take a leave of absence, I'll just quit and I'll figure out what to do when I get back. Now, this is going to sound crazy in the context of America, but if you read the Bible like I do, apparently we as Christians are supposed to do things that seem kind of crazy to people who are not following Jesus. So my first step after talking to the advisory committee was to get in touch with a woman I knew over there, Evelyn Kumantale. She runs a charity called Outreach to Africa. She had some clinics based in Fort Portal, Uganda, also out at the Paul Devlin School, and another one down on Rebsingo, which is just across the Semliki River from the Congo. She and I exchanged some emails. We had never met face to face before, but we came to the conclusion that it was probably a good idea for me to come over and work over there. I worked with my friend Tom Eggum's charity, Hope for Kids. I used that as my planning and funding, put a lot of money into that. And here's the part that's going to sound crazy to most people. I cashed out my 401k, I quit my job, and I packed up, got ready to go live in Uganda. One interesting thing happened pretty early on in my Uganda adventure in 2014. I was sponsored for my airfare by the Emirates Foundation with Emirates Airways. They do provide airfare for medical providers in some areas where they're going to do volunteer work if it supports the mission that the Emirates Foundation is set up for, which is one of the places they support is Uganda. I showed up at Dulles Airport and I was dressed like a typical American traveler. I believe I had on shorts and a t-shirt, and one of the women working for the airline approached me and she was like, "Excuse me, are you traveling by yourself?" I said, "Yes." And then she looked at me and said, "Do you have a jacket and a pair of long pants that you can get to in your luggage?" I said, "I don't have anything like a suit coat or anything." She's like, "No, any kind of jacket." And I'm like, "I think so, but why are you asking me?" And she said, "We're looking for passengers to upgrade to first class, and our first class area dress code is you have to have long pants and you have to have a jacket." Didn't have to be a sport coat or a business suit jacket. I found a pair of long pants and a jacket, and I got upgraded to first class on a brand new airplane smell 777 with the little things you can fold up over you, lay your seat back, go to sleep. This was all pretty awesome because it was a 13-hour flight on the first leg from Dulles to Dubai. I really enjoyed that flight. However, got to Dubai, we were a little bit late. They held the plane for me and one other fellow that were connecting on an Airbus on the other side of the airport, the Africa terminal. We had to run through some back alleys and stuff inside the airport that I never knew existed. They took us out a back door into a blast furnace. We went from the nice 70-degree air conditioning to the 105-degree dry desert heat of Dubai, ran across the tarmac and got on a plane that wasn't quite as nice as the 777 I had taken from Dulles, but got to Uganda anyway. Spent my first night in country in Kampala at a place called the Apricot House. If the Apricot House is still functioning and you're in Kampala, you're looking for a nice, clean place to stay with the best pancakes that I've had in Uganda, I recommend you look them up and give them a try. When I was in Uganda, I lived in Fort Portal most of the time at Evie's home there, actually, which was right next door to a place called the Rwenzori View Guest House. The Rwenzoris are some mountains that are in that area. And the guest house was small, had 5 or 6 rooms, had a little restaurant bar kind of area. And you could go over there and hang out with people that were expatriates, things like that in the area. And I did that several nights while I was there. Other interesting things that happened while I was in Uganda, I've talked about these in other episodes, so I'm not going to go into them quite as much detail here. They did have an ambulance at Evie's house. A friend of mine, Matt, had been over there a few months before and had told me about the ambulance and that it wasn't running. So one of my projects was I got the ambulance running. Now, one little secret about the ambulance, it was an old Land Rover Defender. So once I had it up and running, I had a pretty cool ride to cruise around Uganda in. And me and my friend and driver Century were always arguing over who was getting to drive and who was going to be the one in charge of getting behind the wheel and things like that. I did get to go to church at the local church in Fort Portal. It's actually a Jehovah's Witness church, which I didn't really know at the time. It's the closest thing I think they have to a megachurch in Uganda. It's called the Carbaroli Kingdom Hall. The place was pretty big. I was going there one Sunday because I was walking across Fort Portal and some guy told me, "Hey man, are you going to prayers?" And I said, "No, I think I missed it." He said, "No, they're getting ready to start one up." So I went there, and it wasn't the English version of their service. If you want to hear a little bit more details on that, check out the episode titled Church in Africa, where I discussed that in more detail. I did get to meet a few different kings over there. One of them, his name was King Albert. He actually wanted me to stay and be his personal medical practitioner, which I had to refuse because I wasn't really a medical practitioner at the time. I did get to meet King Oyo, the Toro King. I also talk about that in an episode called Fun African Style. I was treating his finance minister, it turned out. I got to go to the Toro Palace and go inside, which I had been informed was not something they allowed Caucasians to do. When I was over there, I also had a friend of mine. He came over on a mission trip. I met him in Jinja at the Adrift camp, went whitewater rafting, did some fun things there. We talk about that in the Fun African Style episode. Then did some work with Hope for Kids, came back to Fort Portal with a whole medical team, which somehow I got stuck managing. And then we ended up going home after that, and I got to come back to America, which is pretty challenging when you've been living in Uganda in a pretty austere environment, and now all of a sudden I'm back in downtown Arlington, Virginia, with all the Arlington, Virginia going on around me. And when I got back, first thing I did was held a board meeting, because one of the things I had decided to do while I was in Uganda was now I was convinced I wanted to go to medical school. My friend Bulldog, he actually said, why don't you think about going to PA school? And I kind of blew him off, which I ended up having to apologize to him about later, because when I called my friend Dr. Amy Stone and mentioned to her my plans of possibly going to medical school, she said, you know, Paul, that's a great idea. You'd be really good at medical school. There is one problem. You're too old. You need to go to PA school. That's what I ended up doing. We've also talked about that previously as well. So I came back, and now one of the big challenges is I had to get into and do some prerequisite classes, because there are many things that I had not had in my undergraduate program that you need to get into medical school. Things like biology classes, chemistry classes, biochemistry classes, organic chemistry classes, microbiology. And I had to go through and take all those so I could actually apply for PA school. It was almost 4 full semesters worth of work, but I did it, and I applied to PA school. We've talked about that in a couple of episodes recently as well. Interesting thing happened towards the very end of the year. I was looking at getting back and getting a job because I knew the money I had in the bank wasn't going to last forever. And I did get an IT position working on a project for another government agency as a data center specialist, where I was supposed to help design and select data centers for a highly available environment. I told them that I was interested in doing part-time because I was going to be going to school, and told them I was going to be going to PA school and all that afterwards. And so they initially offered me a full-time job, and I met with my board because I'm like, I need to have part-time so I can do what I was planning to do. And Bulldog, again, being the wise guy that he is, came up with the idea that, why don't you just tell them you want to take less hours and less pay and see what they would say. That actually worked. I went back to them and got a schedule where I was working significantly less. I had them chop about $30,000 off their initial offer and got to do what I wanted to do. Now, interestingly, I did stay with Imperatus a little bit longer than I thought I was going to, and they did bring me on full time, but that company did close under some interesting circumstances pretty rapidly one afternoon, and maybe we'll talk about that another time. Just to kind of wrap up things that went on in 2014, I started off telling you it was a weird and difficult year because I was in a relationship that had some stuff going on. At the end of that year, we actually went on a vacation together to Costa Rica. When we came back, we decided that things weren't going to work out, and it was over. That was actually for the best, because if I'd have continued going down that route, I can see that it would have just not worked out well long term. And then the year after that, I actually started hanging out with my wife, Nancy. We dated for a fairly short time, and we got married in October 9th specifically, of 2015. And the rest is history. I appreciate you tuning in and listening today. I really appreciate you putting up with me as I'm getting this podcast going. I hope it's getting a little better every time, and I can't wait to hear from you in the comments, and you get to hear from me next week when we do it all again. Thank you. The background music Perspectives was created by Kevin McLeod at incompetech.com. It is licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. The website from which the music was downloaded is http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0. Thank you for listening to Medical Mariner Inc. Medical Mariner Inc. is written, produced, and hosted by me, Paul Stewart. If you wish to make suggestions for content, leave me some comments, or have anything you would like for me to know, you can email me at medicalmarinerinc@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. To support the show, please give me a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen on, like, and subscribe to the show. Thanks, and I hope you have a good day.